Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be discussing our Desert Tortoise Transportation Ecology Workshop. But before I get started, I wanted to introduce everyone to Frida, who was a captive tortoise. When she passed away from natural causes, her custodian had her preserved through freeze drying and donated her to the tortoise group to be used for educational purposes. So you will see her used as a model in some of the photos in this presentation and in our documentary that we just finished filming. There are over 60,000 kilometers of major roads throughout the range of the desert tortoise. This species is a high risk for road mortality due to their life history characteristics, movement distance, and behavior. Borman and Sasaki estimated that about one mortality per every 3.2 kilometers of road killed per year. That's over 18,000 estimated tortoise mortalities per year throughout the range of this species. In addition to acting as a population sink, roads fragment habitat and significantly reduce connectivity, which can decrease population viability and increase the risk of local extinction. Therefore, installation of desert tortoise exclusion fencing to reduce road mortality and culvert structures to ensure connectivity have been identified as high priority recovery actions. However, implementation of these recovery actions is often complicated by a number of issues. The cost of materials and fencing is expensive and funding is scarce. Depending on the durability of materials used, fencing may need to be replaced after a number of years. Storm events, environmental conditions, and deliberate destruction by humans can result in increased maintenance burdens and costs for transportation agencies. The current technical specifications are not easily adapted to certain soil substrates, topography, or in flood-prone areas, such as at-grade roads and washes. There are a number of administrative issues that can complicate and/or preclude effective installation of fencing on culverts where it is most needed. Transportation agencies may not have adequate budgets to cover the cost of materials, installation, and maintenance. There may be multiple land ownerships, managers, and jurisdictions where no one agency wants to assume responsibility for long-term maintenance burdens and cost. Coordination among multiple agencies can be further complicated by competing missions. There may also be conflicting mitigation requirements among agencies as well. Permitting issues may add another layer of complexity to expedient implementation of recovery actions to reduce tortoise road mortality and restore connectivity. Finally, some land management agencies, such as national parks, state parks, and wildlife refuges, may be concerned about the effects of tortoise fencing on visitor access and viewscapes. These agencies may want to implement alternative measures to address desert tortoise road mortality and connectivity. The result is that fencing and culverts are not installed where they are most needed. Over 50% of priority road segments remain unfenced, while road mortality continues to be a major threat to recovery in critical habitat units and other conservation areas. Range-wide connectivity is precluded by road mortality and failure to install culverts tied into fencing to effectively facilitate movement of tortoises. Under the current situation, population declines will continue until fencing and culverts are installed within priority segments range-wide. In an effort to address all of these issues, the service worked with several partners to develop a Desert Tortoise Transportation Ecology Workshop and form a task force. The primary goals of the workshop and task force were to address issues and develop ideas for technical solutions, best management practices, and other recommendations that could be consistently implemented across the range of the desert tortoise. The formation of the task force would be comprised of representatives from state transportation and wildlife agencies and representatives from local, state, and federal agencies. This effort is a result of partnerships among multiple government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and academic institutions. The planning team consisted of representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, Federal Highway Administration, Nevada Department of Transportation, Clark County Desert Conservation Program, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, ARC Solutions, Western Transportation Institute, Tortoise Group, Montana State University, and the University of Montana. We hosted a series of 5 webinars highlighting a range of topics relative to desert tourist transportation ecology issues from October 2020 through February 2021. We had a list of over 200 invitees and an average of 70 to 100 participants in each webinar. Recordings are available for each of the webinars. We conducted a field trip for filming a documentary. It was a bit of a whirlwind over 5 days, 3 states, with 2 UNLV students, Izzy and Ahmed, you see here, 1 Fish and Wildlife Service staff and volunteer, 1 staff person from the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and 1 staff person from Western Transportation Institute, and 1 Frida. And we traveled over 1,200 miles, all while complying with COVID-19 safety protocols. The first viewing took place during the 2021 Capstone Workshop, and this documentary will be featured during the field trip session on Monday, the 27th. The virtual Capstone Workshop was held over 3 days during March 2021. We hosted 2-hour morning and afternoon sessions each day. The workshop was led by a professional facilitator and featured plenary and breakout sessions. Representatives from transportation agencies, local, state, and federal agencies, NGOs, and academic institutes participated in the workshop. The following products resulted from the workshop: a pre-workshop survey, the workshop report, documentary, and finally, the formation of the Desert Tortoise Task Force. The key issues identified through the workshop include the following. 1, develop best management practices for range-wide implementation. 2, improve interagency coordination, collaboration, and communication. 3, resolve regulatory compliance issues and conflicts between federal and state regulatory mandates and lack of consistent management techniques across the range. 4, identify funding resources for installation, maintenance, monitoring, mitigation, and mitigation measures. And finally, address maintenance capacity and jurisdictional issues. The task force is comprised of representatives from state transportation, wildlife agencies, and representatives from local, state, and federal agencies. The first kickoff meeting was held on May 5th, and the subgroups were formed to address specific issues such as policy, technical designs, funding, mitigation, monitoring, and minimization measures. The task force is implementing an interdisciplinary approach to problem solving through sharing professional expertise while developing working relationships among agencies and partners. The primary product of the task force will be development of guidelines and technical solutions that could be implemented range-wide and also possible MOUs. All subgroups have met and identified respective priorities. The next several slides provide an overview of these priorities, beginning with the policy subgroup. The most important priority identified overall was installation of fencing to prevent desert tortoise road mortality. However, other priorities include identifying interagency policy obstacles and jurisdictional issues that preclude installation of fencing in priority road segments, developing guidance for resolving interagency policy obstacles and jurisdictional issues, providing a framework and recommendations for development of interagency agreements or MOUs. The funding subgroup will address the following: identify funding priorities, develop cost estimates for funding priorities, and then work with the policies subgroup to identify and develop potential funding sources and mechanisms through possible MOUs or interagency agreements. The monitoring subgroup will focus on developing monitoring standards and protocols for the following: effectiveness of tortoise exclusion fencing and other types of barriers, culvert design and function, predator subsidy reduction efforts, plant salvage efforts, population monitoring around fence conservation areas, and any kind of other opportunistic field research. The minimization measures subgroup identified the following priorities: developing a general set of standard minimization measures that can be implemented during a variety of linear infrastructure projects, providing detailed instructions for specific measures to ensure consistent implementation, and identifying sets of measures customized for specific construction and maintenance activities and/or environmental conditions. The mitigation measures subgroup discussed definitions of mitigation and the appropriate implementation of mitigation identified the following priorities: identifying appropriate definition of mitigation in the broader context for linear infrastructure projects, working with the funding subgroup to identify mechanisms for funding mitigation, such as NIFWF accounts, or maybe an Adopt a Road kind of program that would generate funding from businesses. Develop and submit a conservation framework for implementing mitigation strategies to the policy subgroup for incorporation into possible MOUs. And then coordinate with funding and policy subgroups to identify funding mechanisms for mitigation. And finally, the technical subgroup priorities they identified were development of alternative fencing and barrier designs intended to prevent tortoise access to roads. And this may include hosting design workshops such as an interdisciplinary design charrette or a graduate design studio. Identify culvert construction and retrofitting designs that best facilitate tortoise movement across roads while addressing hydraulic issues. And consider developing alternative designs for overpasses that may be attractive to tortoise use. Create a set of case studies from existing fencing and culverts that provide insight into functional designs or solutions that work well, and those that need improvement have design flaws or fail to function effectively. And finally, publication of technical designs and specifications for rangewide implementation. The timeline for completion of task force deliverables is about 6 months to 1 year, and all task force products will be made available through publications and online resources. One other product that has come out of our collaboration with the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, the Western Transportation Institute, and the Tortoise Group is the development of the Roadkill Observation and Data System, or ROADS app, specifically customized for Mojave Desert fauna, including raven observations on or near roads. The Tortoise Group is currently using this app for recording observations while conducting their road warrior surveys for us. And a public version of the ROADS app will soon be available on the Tortoise Group website for download and recording incidental observations of tortoises and other species along the road by the general public. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.